Rig Veda is not well read or understood in the West, but it is actually one of the oldest sacred texts in the world. And unlike many other texts written around the same time, hymns from the Rig Veda are still used in religious rituals today, so it is part of a living tradition. This is the first video in a series I'm going to produce about the Vedic gods. First, I'm going to go over the history and structure of the Rig Veda. And then I'm going to introduce the Vedic gods and talk about some of the aspects of the Rig Veda that resonate with me. The goal here is not to become some kind of Vedic neo-pagan, but to get a sense of the heroic myth that's at the center of it all, and to be inspired by the way that the main gods of the Rig Veda are characterized. As a man, I think that if you look at the way that Indra or the Maruts are described in the Rig Veda, you bulls, I think you'll find them very aspirational as ideals. Etymology. Rig Veda is the oldest part of a larger collection of ancient Sanskrit texts, including Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda. The Sanskrit term Veda, meaning knowledge or wisdom, stems from the root vid, which translates to know. Scholars reconstruct its origins from the Proto-Indo-European root ved, signifying see or know. Incidentally, that common Proto-Indo-European root became the word video in Latin, meaning to see or understand, and it is from that which we get, well, video. The first word, rig, means something like praise. So Rig Veda loosely means something like knowledge of praise, which makes sense for a collection of religious hymns. Compared to many other ancient cultures, very little is known about the development of the culture that produced Rig Veda. There are many theories and some controversies, so I'm going to paint with broad strokes. No one really knows. Many believe that the people who spoke the Proto-Indo-European language or some form of it originated and domesticated horses somewhere in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around modern-day Ukraine. Proto-Indo-European is the reconstructed parent language of many other languages, including Greek and Latin and the Romance languages that evolved from Latin and the Germanic languages and Sanskrit and the languages that evolved from Sanskrit and various other languages and proto-languages, including several which are no longer spoken. Over time, the people who spoke Proto-Indo-European migrated in and out of that area, with some people eventually migrating north and west into Europe, while others migrated south and east. Around the time of the Indus Valley Civilization in Pakistan, it is generally believed that the people who called themselves Arya moved through the region, some settling in northern India and some in Iran. Both the Indo-Aryans who wrote the Rig Veda and the Indo-Iranians who practiced a similar religion that was eventually replaced by Zoroastrianism use versions of the word Arya and Aryan to describe their cultural group and differentiate it from others. In India, the word Arya referred to people who worshipped the Vedic gods correctly and spoke Vedic Sanskrit correctly. Later, it also came to mean noble. The area in northern India, which is considered the cradle of Indo-Aryan civilization, is referred to in the Rig Veda as Aryavarta, or the abode of the Aryas. The hymns in Rig Veda were memorized and sung for many years before they were written down, but it is believed that Rig Veda was composed sometime between 1500 and 900 BCE, during what scholars refer to as the Vedic period, or the late Bronze Age of India. For context, the Epic of Gilgamesh was composed 2100 to 1200 BCE. The Old Testament is believed to have been compiled over a 1,000-year period between 1600 and 600 BCE. The Iliad was written around 800 BCE. Structure. The Rig Veda is a collection of 1,028 hymns, divided into 10 books. Each book is known as a mandala, which can also mean circle, world, or domain. Books 2 through 7 are known as the family books. The family books are the oldest books in Rig Veda, and each one is associated with a particular sage and his family of students. The 8th and 9th mandalas collect hymns of various ages, and the 9th mandala is dedicated to Soma and the Soma ritual. Now, Soma is a magical Vedic beverage, and no one really knows what it was made of. Some have suggested ephedra, because I think it's mentioned and it's common in the region. The 1st and 10th books are technically the newest books, though they may contain hymns as old as the hymns in the other books. The hymns themselves are dedicated primarily to the main Vedic gods, including Agni, Indra, the maruts, Mitra Varuna, the Ashvins, Vayu, and others, but a few hymns deal with other creatures, objects, and concepts. I use the complete and illustrated Griffith translation, primarily because the text is large and the whole layout breathes. And a lot of the editions that you see have very small text. It's very crunched together, and this one is just more enjoyable to read. Commentary. We learn most of our myths from stories. The Bible is a story. The Eddas are stories. We know about the Greek myths from collected stories and cosmogonies, and even from plays where the gods themselves are characters. Rig Veda is a collection of hymns, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. Trying to understand Vedic religion from the Rig Veda is a little bit like picking up a book of songs that Christians sing in church and trying to piece together the story of, say, the resurrection of Jesus from the lines in the song. But in the case of Vedic religion, that book of songs is basically all that we have. There is a story in there, but you have to piece it together. You have to read between the lines, and of course, you will never find a living soul who can tell you if you are right or wrong. Several months ago, I did a podcast about the main story in Rig Veda with Ed from the Order of Fire. Ed speaks and reads Sanskrit, and he spent years studying the Rig Veda, so he's our in-house expert. We talked about the story of Vritra, who is depicted as a dragon, but also sometimes a sorcerer. In the main story of Rig Veda, Vritra has gathered the waters of the world, and he is holding them back from the people, causing them great suffering. Indra, accompanied by his warrior band of maruts, rises up and does battle with Vritra. Invigorated by the magic drink Soma, Indra defeats the dragon Vritra with his thunderbolt weapon, the Vajra. Layered into this narrative is a story about the Indo-Aryans' ongoing conflict with the people they referred to as the Dasa, who are identified as enemies or outsiders or just godless heathens. Beyond that, we know that Agni is the first god mentioned in Rig Veda. Agni is the Vedic god of fire, and drawing from the common Proto-Indo-European root, the word Agni corresponds to the Latin word that gave us ignite. Then there is Indra, king of the gods, and his warrior storm gods, the maruts. There is Vayu, god of the wind, and Varuna, associated with the sky and usually paired with the god Mitra. Together, Mitra and Varuna oversee concepts like truth and justice. Speaking of pairs, there are also the Ashvins, twin gods associated with horses. Surya, god of the sun, is also mentioned in Rig Veda, among others. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, hymns from the Rig Veda are still used today in Hindu rituals, and the Vedas are still considered sacred and foundational books to Hindus. But a lot of Westerners assume that Vedic religion is Hinduism, and that the Rig Veda is a Hindu book, but that's not exactly the case. The religion of Rig Veda preceded Hinduism as it is practiced today, and elements of it were incorporated into Hinduism as it evolved over the years. All of the gods present in the Rig Veda were incorporated into Hinduism, but the various sects of Hindus tend to elevate gods that appeared after the Vedic period, such as Shiva and Kali and Hanuman, and the myriad gods of Hinduism's brightly colored pantheon. So, when I'm talking about Vedic gods and Vedic religion, I'm talking about something older than Hinduism, with its own distinct pantheon of gods. I think it's likely that if people had continued to practice the ancient Greek religion for another 2,000 years, we likely would have seen similar changes and evolutions in their pantheon. Just as the Olympians replaced the Titans, it seems likely that Zeus's family would have been replaced over time. Likewise, if you look at the history of Mesopotamian religions, you see that different gods or names for gods became prominent as power shifted in the region over time. Polytheistic religions just seem to change and evolve organically. The appeal of Rig Veda. All right, to wrap up, I wanted to talk about some of the reasons why Rig Veda appeals to me and why we read it in the Order of Fire. The hymns of the Rig Veda are life-focused and life-affirming. If you read the hymns of the Rig Veda and look what these people were praying for, they're praying to their gods and asking them for things that are very much focused on life in the here and now and success while you're alive. There's not a lot of talk about the afterlife or like your reward is in heaven. In the Rig Veda, the people there are asking for things like food and wealth and success in battle and sons and just general prosperity. And I think that's very distinctive compared to a lot of the religions that are, as Nietzsche would say, focused on death, or the preachers of death, and that life is suffering, and the real true reward is in the afterlife. The people who were praying to Indra and Agni and the Maruts and all the other gods of the Rig Veda, they were asking for success in life here and now, and I think that's very important. Vedic religion is an extremely masculine religion. The Vedic gods are masculine gods. Indra, Agni, the Maruts, they're about warriors and priests. They're not overly concerned with other elements. Females are mentioned throughout the Rig Veda, and female deities are mentioned, but they are not in the forefront. The primary deities that you're talking to in the Rig Veda are all male gods and very masculine gods, thunder gods, storm gods. And, that's, I think, very inspiring, I think, for men. I mean, if you look at even something like the Greek or Roman religions, you'll see a lot more female deities and so forth. And in the later Hindu religions and so forth, again, there's a lot more female influence there. But the gods of the Rig Veda are male warrior gods. And so I think that's really important. And I think it's why a lot of men will really enjoy, once they really get a handle on what the Rig Veda is, and the idea of these gods builds in their heads, I think it'll really connect with them. Inspiring language. The Rig Veda contains unique and inspiring combinations of language. Bold, blameless, self-yoked, combined words that essentially mean self-made king. There's so much powerful and motivating language in the Rig Veda, and I think so much creativity is really like recombining concepts that we already think of and seeing them in new ways. And I think seeing some of these words paired together differently and concepts paired together differently gives us a new spin on a new way to think about things like courage and sovereignty and self-sovereignty and things like that. I think there's a lot of inspiration to be found there. At least there was for me when I read through it. There's a lot of really colorful, exciting language. And I'm going to talk more about some of the descriptors used for these gods and how distinctive they are in videos that come after that about the Indra and Agni and so forth. An alternative masculine aesthetic. In the West, I think we tend to see warriors as being cold and reserved and uniformed. Obviously, that has a lot to do with modern armies, but there's also a dour, puritanical Protestant aesthetic that had a big influence over England and America over the last few centuries. The warrior gods of the Rig Veda are decked out in gold chains and rings and weapons. They drive gold chariots and ride beautiful horses, and they are spoken of as being beautiful themselves. And I think that gives us a different perspective on how masculinity and strength can be portrayed and perceived. If you found this video useful or interesting, please like and subscribe. And in the next videos in this series, I'm going to talk more about Agni, Indra, and the Maruts.
Join us on our Discord, the Greater Mandala. For access, sign up to the Order of Fire's mailing list.